At the turn of the 20th century, there were no modern electronic devices, no television stations, or few newspapers in the larger cities to record the migration of people fleeing the opposition from Hungary to Eastern Europe. This newsworthy event remained unreported and mostly uncovered, and not much was written to attest to the fact that a large number of Hungarians escaped tyranny and landed here on our shores of America seeking safety and freedom. Those immigrants who landed in the northern and eastern sections of our country found lodging and whatever work they could find in the heavy industrial plants of the Northeast and in the coal mines of the eastern United States in Appalachia, where living conditions were very poor. There was discontent. Some family members ventured out to other states seeking another place to live and work outside in the fresh air and sunshine that which they were familiar in the mother country. 3 adventurous Hungarians came to South Louisiana to acquire work in the Brackenridge lumber mill. They were Julia Bruskaj, Adam Mojari, and Tivador Zborai. The 3 were hired by Charles Brackenridge to work in the sawmill. They wrote letters to friends and family in those northern and eastern states, telling about a great opportunity to leave the life they so detested to have a life they desired. They placed ads in Hungarian language newspapers in those states telling about a great chance to own land and farm.
The 3 founders were men who had worked here at the mill and at the Brackenridge Sawmill Lumber Company. And they found that the land was so good, and it was good for farming, it was good for getting out of the mines and the heavy industry up north. They wanted to be out in the fresh air, an open area, so farming was their thing. They were agrarian people from Hungary anyway. So these 3 men came down and found that this was perfect for them. So they wrote notes and letters and things back to the people up north to come down here and just take a look. And they worked in the mill, and it was good for the mill. They needed workers. So the people came, and these 3 guys, Adam Mojari, Julia Bruskaj, and Tivador Zborai came, and they put notices in the northern newspapers, the Szabadság newspaper in Ohio. It was a Hungarian newspaper. And people did read it, and they came down, and they got work at the mill. They brought their families down, and they ended up living here.
Brackenridge Lumber was in need of many employees to work the mill, and the men who were hired on at the mill enticed many more to come work in the mill. Brackenridge, being a compassionate employer, built the immigration house for his employees and their families to live until they could provide their own places to live. In 1912, Charles Brackenridge died suddenly. By this time, the virgin timber was being cut at a fast rate. By 1915, most of the virgin timber had been harvested, and Brackenridge Lumber was looking for other timber ventures in the northwest United States around Washington and Oregon. The mill began to slowly shut down. In 1916, they closed the mill and wanted to sell this cut-over land to recoup their investment. So Brackenridge Lumber surveyed the cutover land into 20-acre plots to sell to the mill employees for around $4 per acre on installments. This may be the first installment plan in the U.S. at this time. All prospered. Brackenridge recovered much of the funds expended on this lodging venture, and the Hungarians managed to buy 20 acres of good farmland in the deal. It was beneficial to both parties, a symbiotic relationship. This was a dream come true for the Hungarian employees to live on their own land and breathe free in the great outdoors.
The land here in Louisiana was primitive, it was undeveloped, and they had virgin timber all over it. So Brackenridge Lumber Company they clear cut. They were not doing reforestation, so they clear cut and got out. So the land left that the people bought was about $4 an acre, and they were measured out in 20-acre plots. And it had stumps all over it, and it was really not usable. So they had to remove the stumps the best way that they could, and the way they did that, they took their pickaxes from the mines, and they took a mule with some chains, and they hacked all around it, put the chains to the stump and pulled it out one by one. And this was after working in the mill, maybe at nighttime by lantern light. So it was very difficult. And then to start with, though, they needed planting. You know, I had to plant something to eat. So they planted around the stumps until the stumps could be pulled out. Then their rows got straight and smooth, and it was all improved.
There is a story here. How did these Hungarians survive in this undeveloped land for over 100 plus years? There was no community, no large cities nearby. Hammond, the nearest small town, was a half a day away by horse and wagon. Independence was a must, yet everyone helped each other in times of need.
A typical day for a Hungarian settler here in Arpadhon was very busy. They had the ladies had to do all the housework. The ladies managed to do their beautiful embroidery. They managed to do cooking and sewing of clothes. The men, in the meantime, went out into the fields and they were busy working on the strawberry farm. And by the way, we were told that the strawberry farming is like a 13-month-a-year job. It's so busy, there's no time off. So everything revolved around the strawberry season. Even school started in July because of strawberries. Because in the spring, they had to be picked. And when the crop came in, they needed to be picked. The children picked, the ladies and the adults packed. And they would sometimes ship out 900 crates in a day. And those crates were the big wooden crates with 24 wooden pints.
Communication was poor and very slow in those very early days, and surely their friends and relatives in Hungary wondered what happened to these venturesome souls who left the old country in such haste. Therefore, I wanted to tell their story of adversity, perseverance, and success. They deserve to have their story told so the world will know what happened to those who fled Hungary over 100 years ago.
A typical day for the Hungarian settlers was making sure that no one became injured or very ill. They had a Bika nanny that was here, and her name was Bika, and nanny is like a endearing term, like an aunt. But she was very astute in the ways of early medicines, herbs, and she studied this in Europe. And then when she came here, she was able to help with different sicknesses. And there were doctors in the area. There were in Holden and Albany and Springfield and Livingston. But they only went to those doctors if it was something that Bikanani decided that it was really serious and needed to call in the doctor. But she did a birthing of many, many babies. And she died in 1935. So up to 1935, all the babies probably got into the world by Bikanani. The children of Hungarian settlement went to the Hungarian school. And that's the school building that was moved from Springfield. And it was moved on logs, and it took a long time to get here. And it's quite a story in itself. But anyway, the children went to this school, and they had to pay probably 50 cents, maybe $1 a month or something like that to go to this school. And it was a one-room school. They had benches in there, and each bench was a different grade level. And the one teacher taught everything. Didn't have very many books. They used a slate and some chalk for writing purposes. The wash day was quite different from what we are familiar with today. There were no labor-saving devices like washing machines and dryers. There were number 3 wash tubs, and you put one with the soapy water in it, and then you put the other one with clear water for rinsing purposes. And then the ladies would have to get in there with an old washboard and some lye soap that they made on the farm. And they hung them out, they wrung them out best they could and hung them out on fences or on wire or any place that they could to dry. And it was sun-dried. So this was the original solar drying system. The ladies, realizing that they had to sew the things for their family, they saved flour sacks. They came in beautiful colors. but not always could you get the same one at the same time. So they would save them up until all they had was maybe one particular pattern. A lady could make a dress or a blouse or a shirt. And they also had unbleached domestic, which was flowers, feed sacks. And the feed sacks were a rough kind of fabric. They did sheets, pillowcases, curtains, dish towels, things like that. The children entertained themselves by any way that they could. They did not have store-bought toys, so they played with things that they found in the everyday environment. They rode horses, they petted animals. Although when the horses were busy or the mules were busy, they were not allowed to be petted because they didn't know the difference between work and play. But the children played with jacks, they played balls, they played with hopscotch, they had jump ropes, just things that all the normal children did back then. There were no Xboxes or electronic toys. The Hungarian wedding was a gala to behold. It was really something. They danced and they sang and they ate and they had a real fine time. The wedding lasted 3 days. The first days were getting it all ready. They had sawdust piles. They would bring in 25 or so pounds of chunks of ice, put it in that sawdust, and it would keep it for days. And they put their drinks on there to keep it cool. They kept their foods cool if they needed to. The dances were all in costume. People would dress, and they had their local band that played, and they just had a fine time. There was a lot of food. People would kill their fatted animals. They cooked kalach and kiflis for days. They made cabbage rolls. They made just all kinds of wonderful foods, Hungarian food. One of the traditions that the Hungarians brought with them from Hungary was the traditional Hungarian harvest dance. And it did not come on paper, it came in their heads. They remembered the music that played in Hungary, so when they got here, they managed to take that same music, and they had costumes made locally, and they put it together, and after the harvest was over, they wanted to celebrate. This dance then is the culmination of this harvest, and the dance is a colorful dance that with young couples, older couples, and they dance for approximately 20 minutes to the old-fashioned music, the regular Hungarian music. There were mazurkas, there was csárdás, there was waltzes, and polkas. The Hungarian harvest dance, traditional harvest dance, attracts visitors from all over the world, even from Hungary. And this year we were fortunate to have a Hungarian ambassador here. It was part of the harvest dance, and he talked at the harvest dance. And we do have them come from time to time, and they come to this area. We're widely known in Hungary. They are familiar with Arpadhon. My book is over there in Hungary. So they're quite familiar with us, and they do come and visit. Sometimes newspaper people will come. Sometimes they're just local, maybe authors or TV people have come. The businesses in the early colony were meager to start with. They had stores. In fact, there was Beregy's General Mercantile, Hungarian Mercantile, that was across the railroad track, and they were complete. You could buy everything from food to seeds to feeds to things for the animals. And then there was a Cesak's store that was a little bit later, and he had a meat market, and you could buy any kind of meat there. There was a regular grocery store. They had a Farkas, a service station. They did not have banks because the co-ops very well took care of that. The co-ops, there was the First Hungarian and the United Hungarian. Those were the co-ops that took care of the farmers. And in those stores, by the way, they did not always pay by cash. They had a tab, and the tab was paid at the end of the strawberry season when they got paid. The bilingual program was a program set up by the federal government in 1977, and it was to help teach Hungarians and the French languages of their own countries. We had teachers that came from France that taught French in French settlement in Arpadhon. Then they had people come from, teachers that came from Hungary, taught Hungarian here in the Albany School, elementary school, in 77 to 1980. And they had local people that were coordinators, and Alex Kropog was one of the coordinators. And they taught the language in the schools. In the fall, and when the weather turns cool, usually November, they would have their hogs ready for killing. And without electricity, it was very, very difficult to preserve anything. But the hog killing was done in the cool weather to help with that. And everybody came in and helped. It was a process that even neighbors came. The hog was killed. They burned the hide, get the hair off of it. Then later they would scrape it down with a soap and some water and some knife. And then they would butcher it. And in butchering it, some was given to the neighbors that helped. Now, the rest of it had to be fried down in large vats, big wash pots at home. They fried it down. They put the meat in these large 10-gallon crocks, and then they poured this fat over the top. And that fat congealed and hardened and kept germs out of it. It would go for as much as 6 months. The Hungarians, after they came here to this country, were willing to become a good citizen in all forms of life. So they became citizens, and they also joined the military in all branches of the military, and they were, many served with distinction, many earned medals from the federal government, of course. The 1956 Hungarian Revolution was an uprising of all the young people and the factory workers in Hungary. This was in 1956, October 23rd. The Russians were heavy-handed. There was a lot of people missing overnight, never showed up. They were arrested and no telling what happened to them. And there was a lot of other things that happened. The communist government was very harsh with them. And the Russian tanks came after the lull and crushed this rebellion when they thought they had won. But then after this crushing defeat, all the young people realized they had to go. They couldn't stay. And 14 of them came here to the Albany area. And I married one of them. My niece married another one. And so therefore they intermarried in with the local folks. And this is a very, and after the revolt happened, these people came with nothing. They did not even understand the language, so they had to learn the language, they had to get a job, and they never were wards of the state. They took care of themselves, they became taxpayers, and they too went to the military and served our country. The north-south connection in Hungarian settlement meant that there were relatives still living up north, and there were relatives here in the south. And they visited quite often, and sometimes even they found it usable to go up there for a while and work. For instance, when the car companies, the big car companies opened up their businesses to making automobiles, then a lot of people from here went up north to work in the auto industry. When that did not work out so well, they decided to come back again, and so they came back to the strawberry farming. So it was a constant back and forth issue with some folks. And, so that you have Hungarians, families living in both areas.
America's a bit stronger because these Hungarians who risked all and contributed much with their talents and work ethic to the United States of America.